Standing Committee on Finance pursuant to Standing Order 108 Bracket 2 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, June 20th, 2022. The committee is meeting to discuss the current state of fiscal federalism in Canada. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23rd, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and are remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefits of witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raised hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses, and I wish to inform just all the members and the witnesses here at the committee that all witnesses have been tested for today's meeting and have passed the test. With us today as individuals, we have Danielle Bellon, who's the director of McGill Institute for the Study of Canada, and James McGill, who's a professor at the Department of Political Science at McGill University. Welcome. As an individual, we have Lee Sonderstrom, who's a retired professor at McGill University. Welcome, Lee Sonderstrom. And from the Office of the Parliamentary Budget Officer, we have the Parliamentary Budget Officer, Yves Giroux. Welcome. And with Yves Giroux is Robert Berend, who's the Advisor Analyst. So, witnesses, you now have up to 5 minutes to make your opening remarks. We're going to start from the top. As I introduced you with the individuals, Danielle Bellon and James McGill, please.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup de m'avoir invité.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today on the state of fiscal federalism in Canada. Fiscal federalism is a fundamental aspect of our public policy and our federal system, which is arguably one of the most decentralized in the world. However, the way in which major federal transfers occur and their level of generosity are major sources of controversy in this country. This is particularly true of the Canada Health Transfer, which the provinces are demanding be increased immediately, and the equalization program, which is politically contested, particularly by the governments of some provinces that do not currently receive equalization payments. While the provinces agree on the need for a major increase in the Canada Health Transfer, equalization is sometimes very divisive among the provincial premiers. Despite its somewhat controversial nature, equalization is necessary in a country where regional economic inequalities are significant. This is why Section 36(2) of the Constitutional Act 1982 states, and I quote, "Parliament and the Government of Canada are committed in principle to making equalization payments to ensure provincial governments have sufficient revenues to provide reasonably comparable levels of public services at reasonably comparable levels of taxation." This imperative remains, and equalization is here to stay. More generally, beyond equalization, fiscal transfers from Government of Canada to the provinces and territories remains one of the foundations of our federal system, without which it could not function. This role of Government of Canada within the federal system makes it possible, in part, the decentralization of many public services across the country, particularly through the equalization program. Without that, we might have a more centralized federation than is currently the case today.
We must pay constant attention to the architecture of fiscal federalism and the need to adapt federal transfers to changing economic and fiscal circumstances. Fiscal federalism should be updated on a regular basis, even if the proposed changes are potentially controversial. Without constant adaptation, fiscal federalism is likely to fall victim of what Yale political scientist Jacob Hacker calls policy drift, a logic according to which the failure to reform public policies might render them less effective over time. To avoid policy drift in fiscal federalism, we should look for new ideas about how to improve the system. For instance, in a working paper published a year ago, University of Calgary economist Trevor Toom and I outline 3 reform pathways for federal healthcare funding that are alternatives to the status quo, namely demographic adjustments to the Canada Health Transfer and the possible advent of a new form of fiscal governance in Canada. And so I think that's important to really think about how we could reform the system. Incrementalism is not necessarily a bad thing, it's a prudent thing, but sometimes we need to think outside of the box and discuss broad options beyond the status quo. Regarding equalization, the Government of Canada should create a new expert panel similar to the 2005-2006 expert panel on equalization and territorial formula financing. Chaired by Alberta-based economist Al O'Brien, it submitted its report back in May 2006, and these recommendations were implemented the following year. And of course, a lot have changed since then, since the equalization formula was adopted in 2007. And there were also other changes to equalization in 2009. And I think in part because we have changing circumstances. For example, the fact that the fiscal capacity of provinces, the gap among the provinces has declined, especially since 2014. The landscape has evolved, and we need to reassess the equalization formula and frankly, reassess fiscal federalism more generally. In the longer term, the Government of Canada should explore the possibility of creating a permanent expert body that could provide regular advice to the federal government in the field of fiscal federalism. The creation of such a permanent body, which already exists in other federal countries like Australia and the Commonwealth Grants Commission, which has existed there since 1933, could help lower the political temperature over equalization and other federal transfers, even if the allocation of fiscal resources will always remain contentious. There's nothing more political than money and the allocation of money in a federal system. Regardless of who will be tasked to advise the Government of Canada over changes necessary to avoid policy drift and adapt our fiscal federalism system, we must look at the big picture beyond just individual transfers. For example, the interaction among equalization, the Canada Social Transfer and the Canada Health Transfer is really relevant. If we want to introduce changes in one transfer, we have to take into account what's happening in the other 2 main transfers. Thinking about reforming fiscal federalism
Professor
should also
Belland,
entail...
Yeah, if you could just start to wrap up, please. Yeah, we are well over time.
I'm wrapping up.
Thank you. Merci.
Last paragraph. De rien. Merci à vous. Should also entail a broader discussion about fiscal capacity, the state of our economy, population aging, regional disparities, and other key factors that affect the availability of fiscal resources and the varying capacity of provinces and territories. So I would like to end by telling you about the forthcoming paper of the Fiscal Federalism Policy Network that is titled The Road Ahead, Rethinking Fiscal Federalism for the 20th Century, which looks at the big picture of our 3 main transfers and other aspects of fiscal federalism in Canada. The report will appear next month with the support of the IRPP and the Canada West Foundation. And as soon as it appears, I will send you a copy of that report. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much for your attention.
Merci, Professor Belland. And now we'll hear from Professor Soderstrom for 5 minutes, please.
I would like to talk a little bit about an aspect of fiscal federalism that is marked by much controversy these days, cost for healthcare. Numerous provincial leaders in recent years have claimed that Ottawa has greatly reduced its cost sharing for provincial healthcare. They claim that Ottawa currently pays only 21% of provincial costs, so they demand federal transfers increase to 35%. But as I will explain shortly, provinces are wrong. Federal cost sharing has not been reduced. The extent of cost sharing now is the same as it was in the mid-1970s. That is about 35% of provincial spending. The provinces err because they only consider the amount of cash Ottawa gives them each year. They ignore the substantial cash value of the tax points Ottawa gave them in 1977. I am familiar with change in federal cost sharing. I was a health economist at McGill University for 40 years, beginning in 1968. When the changes in cost sharing arrangements were negotiated in 1976, I was writing my book, The Canadian Health System, and following the negotiations very closely. Additional funding for care may well be justified now, but federal provincial negotiations to discounts and modalities should be based on careful analysis, unhampered by erroneous provincial claims. Our new spending will probably require additional funding from both levels of government. The provinces have not acknowledged this. They want Ottawa to foot the bill. To understand why the provincial claims are wrong, one familiar with the changes in cost-sharing arrangements made in 1977. To that year, federal cost-sharing was only for hospital and physician services. In 1976, for example, Ottawa paid 6% of provincial costs for these two services. Its payments were equivalent to 36% of total provincial spending, 36%. Moreover, before 1977, federal transfers were composed entirely of cash. In 1977, Ottawa and the provinces agreed to these cash payments. And by way of compensation, to transfer some federal tax points to the provinces. That is, Ottawa reduced its income tax rates, allowing the provinces to raise theirs. Thus, since 1977, federal cost sharing, if properly measured, has had two parts. The cash payments increased provincial tax revenue from the transferred tax points. The province there because they consider only the first part, the cash payments. Calculations I made several years ago, they are making a major mistake because the value of these tax points has been substantial. In 2005, 6, and 7, cash payments alone were 22% of provincial health spending. But when the value of the tax points is in, total cost sharing was 34% of provincial spending. 34%, essentially the same as in 1976. More recently, Taylor, an important Canadian healthcare researcher and former president of the University of Toronto, and two co-authors found the same thing prevailed in 2019. Total federal transfers that year were 35% of total provincial on healthcare. Again, essentially the same as in 1976. Thus, contrary to the provincial claims, Ottawa has not reduced its cost sharing for the provinces should stop making those claims. Although additional healthcare funding may well be justified, the necessary federal-provincial negotiations should be based on careful analysis, not hampered by erroneous provincial claims.
Have you concluded, Professor Soderstrom?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, I wasn't sure if that was the end. Thank you. Right on time. And so we're off to the Office of the Parliamentary Budget Officer and Monsieur Giroux, please, for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président et les membres du comité. Nous vous remercions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to appear before you today. We're pleased to be here today to discuss our analysis related to your study in the current state of fiscal federalism. With me today, I have Robert Bearhand, advisor analyst. In accordance with the PBO's legislative mandate to provide impartial, independent analysis to help parliamentarians fulfill their constitutional role, consists of holding government accountable. My office has published reports on the major federal transfers and fiscal sustainability at various levels of government. In September 2020, we published a report entitled Federal Support Through Major Transfers to Provincial and Territorial Governments. This report examines federal support through major transfers to the provincial and territorial governments over the periods 2008 to 2018-19. I'll conclude in English.
More recently, in July 2022, we published our annual Fiscal Sustainability Report, which provides an assessment of the sustainability of government finances over the long term for the federal government, subnational governments, and public pension plans, including an analysis of our long-term projections for major federal transfers to other levels of government. Additionally, our Economic and Fiscal Outlook in October 2022 presents our current projections for the Canada Health Transfer, the Canada Social Transfer, and the equalization programs. Robert and I will be pleased to respond to any questions you may have regarding our analysis of the major federal transfer programs or other PBO work. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Giraud.
Thank you very much, Mr. Giroux.
We are now, members and witnesses, moving to questions. In our first round, each party will have up to 6 minutes to ask questions. And we're starting with the Conservatives. I have MP Morantz up for the first 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today for this extremely important study. I just got back on the Finance Committee, so I wasn't involved in the earlier portions of the study, so I may be playing a little bit of catch-up. So I have some fairly basic questions. My first question really has to do with the equalization transfer and the principle around it. And I think I'll start with the Parliamentary Budget Officer on this one, and if anyone else wants to weigh in, they can. The basic principle is something like this, that the equalization transfer is to allow for similar standards of social services across all provinces and territories at similar levels of taxation. Is that more or less correct?
Yep, that's accurate.
Yeah. How has that worked out? Is it happening? Are there similar levels of services for various social enterprises across the country? Do we have any studies or data that could substantiate that the principle of equalization has actually taken effect?
Well, there has been some studies, notably regarding the convergence or divergence of per capita GDP across provinces over time. And we did that in our reports, I think the 2020 reports, and we looked at the convergence of per capita GDP across provinces. And in that report, we found that over the last 10 to 12 years, there seems to have been a trend towards convergence of per capita GDP across provinces. So GDP is one measure through which we can measure whether economic disparities persist or whether they are getting smaller over time.
Yeah, I'm sort of really more after something a little bit different. Years ago, my younger son was diagnosed with autism. It turns out he was quite severe, and I was involved in lobbying the provincial government for better autism therapy services, and we were successful. And Manitoba ended up having a gold standard in autism therapy. It was called the ABA, or Applied Behavioral Analysis Program in Manitoba. What I found out through that autism journey was that some provinces had no such services. We had friends in Nova Scotia who had children with autism. They ended up moving to Manitoba because of the program that we had there. So it's that kind of detail that I'm wondering about, because it seems to me that if billions of dollars are going across the country to different jurisdictions, that citizens of Canada should deserve similar services at a more granular level, not looking at the metrics you necessarily talked about, but actual programs. And I'm just wondering if anyone's had a look at that or if that's something that needs to be explored.
To my knowledge, no. But what the legislation says, equalization notably, says that provides funding to provinces to allow them to provide comparable services, not identical or perfectly identical services across jurisdictions, and at comparable levels of taxation. So it means that provinces have freedom to adjust their basket of services and also adjust their taxation accordingly.
Okay. Now, with regard to the sustainability report, how sustainable are, I realize your report was back, I think, in the spring, but given the fall economic statement, the $52 billion in spending, interest rates have gone up, I think, since the time you did your report, from 0.25% overnight rate to now it's 4.25%, 500 basis points just today. Does your perspective over the sustainability of government finances over the long term still hold, or are you reevaluating that opinion?
As you pointed out, there are various events that take place in between our reports. That's why we have undertaken to update it every year to take into consideration the various factors that come into play, such as an increase in interest rates and additional potentially permanent government spending. So it would be difficult for me to assess how recent changes in policy and in economic conditions have affected positively or negatively the overall fiscal sustainability without doing a full analysis.
So we'll wait for that update then. But in the report, you note that slower economic growth will put upward pressure on government programs such as healthcare, OAS, pension benefits, and that fiscal policy changes might be necessary to avoid unsustainable government debt. Your report said that the government could increase spending or cut taxes by $45 billion at the time. I'm just wondering if based on those changes, and I realize you've kind of answered the question already, but I'm still curious about it. Do you think that the goal of the Bank of Canada increasing these interest rates is essentially to slow the rate of economic growth in order to bring demand down? So if they're successful, it should mean that there's going to be upward pressure on these programs. Do you agree with that perspective?
Well, the goal of the Bank of Canada in its monetary policy actions, the recent ones, is to slow economic growth in the short term, to ensure that inflation does not become a burden in the medium and longer term. So while the recent rate increases by the bank will slow economic growth in the short term, the goal ultimately is to ensure that the economy can operate better without the burden of inflation weighing on economic growth.
Thank you. Thank you, MP Morantz. And now to the Liberals, MP MacDonald, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I want to go back to Mr. Soderstrom. You mentioned some very interesting points, and you've been obviously studying this for a lot longer than I have. Regionalization. I'm just wondering what effect of equalization should be contributed to regionalization when you look at places like Alberta GDP per capita is 185% of that of where I come from on Prince Edward Island, and the personal income in Alberta is about 160,000 or 160% more than what Prince Edward Island has. And you talked about erroneous provincial claims and cost share with the provinces. You mentioned tax points, and I'm wondering if you could expand on that comment relative to tax points and how effective that is on the equalization formula.
Professor Soderstrom, you're on mute. You are on mute, Professor Soderstrom. You are on mute. Can you hear me? You are on mute. It might be, is it on his headset? It may be on, okay, there you go.
Okay, there we go. I can't answer, unfortunately, answer your question because I haven't looked at the implication of cost sharing on the equalization payments.
What was that? I didn't hear.
You can repeat, Professor Soderstrom, and you may want to turn off your video because so we could capture your sound better because it's a little choppy for the.
Or is that better?
Yeah, you may want to turn off your video. It may come across easier. It may be your internet.
Stop the video. So
Yeah, okay. Okay, so Professor Soderstrom, if you can continue.
Well, again, I can't answer your question because I have not looked at the implication of cost sharing arrangements for the fiscal transfer, for the sharing payments.
Okay, Mr. Soderstrom, could you talk a little bit about, you mentioned tax points. Could you expand on what you're talking about relative to tax points in the equalization formula?
In the again, I don't understand how that links into the equalization formula. I just haven't looked at that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Beeland?
You want background on the tax issue generally?
Yes.
The basic idea was in 1977 when for the feds to be able to justify cutting back on their cash payments was to find a different source of financing for the provinces. And the provinces were quite keen on the idea that they would get a transfer of taxing power from the federal government. And what this involved, reduction by the federal government of the personal income taxes and a reduction in the corporate income tax. And that allowed the provinces then to increase their taxation, generating additional revenue for healthcare without putting an added burden on the typical taxpayer when they take into account both the federal and the provincial taxes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Soderstrom. Mr. Beeland, I'm going to go to you. You have and you mentioned it in your preamble about you previously written about Australia's Commonwealth Grants Commission as a potential model we could use for equalization payments. Can you tell us a little bit about this model and what Canada could learn from it?
Yes, so thank you very much for your question. In Australia, they have what they call the Commonwealth Grant Commission. It has existed since 1933. But of course, its mission has changed, has been updated over the years. And so you have a body with a chairperson and at least two other members who are looking at fiscal federalism, especially the way in Australia they share the GST, because they have a tax sharing system in Australia, which is quite interesting. And I think Canada should also consider that, by the way, where basically the GST is shared with the territories and the states, 2 territories and 6 states in Australia. And these, the members of this Commonwealth Grant Commission, they look at public finance in the provinces and territories. They look at changing economic circumstances, and they write a report. They issue a report to the Australian Parliament, and they make recommendations about equalization payments and fiscal transfers. And in the end, of course, they don't make any final decisions. It's the Parliament that has to vote, reject, or adopt these recommendations. But that system has an advantage of, I think, lowering a bit the political temperature over equalization, because it's not civil servants, because it's an arm's length commission. It's really politically independent, right? So it's not civil servants who work for their political masters within the government who do this. It's people who are at an arm's length from the government who make these recommendations. And I think with André Lecourt and others, we have written about how this model could be, I think, useful for Canada. We could look into it, not copy, do exactly the same thing. But I think a permanent body could be helpful in terms of equalization, but also perhaps also looking at even the CHT and the CST and how they interact. The thing with equalization is that the way it works in Canada right now, and it's been the case since 1957, since the program was created, is that equalization is based only on the calculation of the fiscal capacity of provinces. But what they have in Australia and in some other federal countries, they also look at expenditure needs related to population aging or the level of indigenous population that you might have on the territory, the number of immigrants, and so forth. So they take into account expenditure needs, not just fiscal capacity. So the equalization system in Australia is even more complex than in Canada. But certainly, I think we should consider changing the governance of equalization, because it's such a political hot potato that having an arm's length body might be helpful. It will always remain contentious because, again, it's about money, and there is political conflict among different parts of the country over this. But
merci, Professor Berland. Merci, and thank you, MP MacDonald. MP Samari, please, for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, welcome to all our witnesses. Thanks for your attendance and your presentations. Quite interesting. My questions are addressed to Mr. Giroux and his associate analyst. Now, the objective on this study on federal fiscalism, it comes from Mr. Blakey of the NDP, who wanted to propose a certain number of issues to the committee so that we could take a look at a green transition towards a green economy, in fact, and integrate that into federal fiscalism. So that was a basic idea. We heard from Mr. Klein. Today, I'd like to come back to the basis on what fiscal federalism is. Either Mr. Berland or Mr. Giroux, could you give us a definition? When you examine federal fiscalism, could you explain to us what it is? Well, I can explain it to you in layman's terms, if you will. I'm not a constitutionalist, and the question of jurisdictional authority, I would define it as follows. It's the organization of a state which decides to agree to pool some of the resources in order to redistribute the benefit, the wealth, in a more equitable fashion within a federated model. Thank you. With the Constitution, of course, which in fact has a clear list of who does what, and jurisdictionally, some are joint. Obviously, the revenues should match the responsibilities of each jurisdiction in its responsibilities to serve the public. So fiscal federalism might have programs. You mentioned the three basic transfers, the health transfer, the social transfer, and equalization. And now, with the federal administration, this allows to provide services as required and ensure a certain redistribution, leveling the playground, the ground. Yes, it's done through agreements, federal, provincial, territorial, and they have the same access to the assets, or revenue assets, as does the federal government, but their responsibilities perhaps are of a lesser nature. Okay, quite clear. You've produced the report, often the report on fiscal viability. The last was published in July of this year. Can you just give us the broad outline of this report, this latest report, and its major conclusions? Well, I'll exclude pension regimes because they are, in fact, very sustainable on the long term, and we expect that. But financial viability is to ensure that the government sector is viable in the long term. What we mean by that is usually, actuarially speaking, 75 years. So if we take a look on our programming for automatic pilot, that there won't be constant recurring indebtedness. And the situation is better federally than it is for the totality of the provinces. So for the long term, when we examined it in June, the situation for the federal was in fact viable for the 75 period, and not so for the provinces. Most of federal expenses are constrained by the percentage of GDP that has to be kept and transferred. There's direct payments to individuals as well involved. So the main expenditures of provinces are in fact disturbed by the aging of the population, whereby health services will have to be increased for these people. So that explains the major part of the disparity. Well, thank you. Well, this is one of the conclusions that you came to. It seems to come back in many of your reports, in your long-term reports. Each of your reports, the federal government seems to do quite well for itself, will be not in constant debt. But for the provinces, they seem to be lagging somewhat. There's going to be deficits. They may accumulate, increasing their debt. And your final report, your most recent, and this might apply to the federal and the provincial, the situation for the provinces is not as severe or acute as it was in past reports. How do you explain that? Well, the budgetary aspect has improved in the provinces and territories. So the start point, of course, is important in how you get to the next 75 years. So we revised some of the economic data and the demographic data, which explains a relative improvement in their fiscal situation. But it doesn't change the fact that the federal government is in better standing, fiscally speaking, than the provinces. Do I have a minute left, Mr. Chair? Well, I have 1 minute of questions for 1 minute of response. Thank you very much. When we questioned the government on these health transfers, for example, they said we're going to increase them by 10% this year, given that the transfer formula does encompass inflation rate. Do you have any comment on that 10%? Were you able to analyze and evaluate whether this was more generous than in past years, given inflation? And would you have any comment or observation on that? Well, the increase in the transfers, of course, depends on the variability in the GDP over the last year. And it's going to, apparently, the inflation rate also is going to be about 8 plus or minus the inflation. And the economic growth, of course, is holding steady. Thank you, Deputy Saint-Marie.
And MP Blaney, welcome to the committee, and you have 6 minutes for questions.
Well, thank you, Chair, and I want to welcome all the witnesses and thank you for your testimony today. My first question is going to be directed to Mr. Beland. I am subbing, in fact, for my colleague Daniel Blakey, as was mentioned earlier, and he has read the book that you co-authored, Fiscal Federalism and Equalization Policy in Canada, recently, which he thought gave a nice overview of fiscal federalism as it exists in Canada. He also recently read A Good War by Seth Klein, who the committee has already heard from. One of the things that Seth Klein talks about in his book is the idea of a climate transfer under the equalization payment model as a tool government could explore using to combat climate change. as an expert on fiscal federalism, I'm wondering if you'd be able to talk to us today about if that is something you think the governments could look at. What kind of considerations should governments take into account in discussions like these? And do you think there are any pitfalls around the idea of a climate transfer? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, it's not something I've really studied directly, this proposal. But what I have to say is that it could be part of the mandate of the expert panel on equalization that I hope will actually be created soon, because we need to look into equalization, as I said, for a number of reasons. And I think that that climate change is certainly a factor when you deal with equalization in relationship to natural resources, especially non-renewable resources. At the same time, this could be quite contentious politically. So I think that it might be a good idea to have this discussion done through an arm's length expert body. But it's again, the devil is in the detail. So you can have this broad idea that sounds good on paper, but it's the way it is actually implemented. So I think we should discuss it. But at the same time, we should understand that this is likely to be quite contentious because, of course, such a proposal will, may advantage some provinces over others, and that will probably create more tension over equalization rather than less.
Well, fair enough. And I'm going to move to a little bit of a different subject. But I am coming back to you, Mr. Biland. You did allude in your testimony to some ways that you thought the Canada Health Transfer could be modernized. I know that in my riding in North Island Powell River, I represent a pretty large riding with a lot of rural communities, and we've hit a really significant crisis where emergency rooms are being shut down. For example, in 1 month, the emergency room was shut every night for 28 days out of the month, which you can imagine is pretty concerning when you're having any kind of health issue. So I'm just wondering if you could talk about the fact, would this ideas or the thoughts you have around modernization of the CHT, would it help address some of these concerns, and how could we look at it to make sure that those communities that are more rural and remote actually get some of the supports that they need to go through these significant transition times?
Yes, so one thing that could be done to address this issue at a broad level is to build in some demographic factors into the calculation of the Canada Health Transfer. And so this is something we discussed with Trevor Toomb in this study that we published, a working paper published by the School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary, which is available online. And I think that this could address some of the challenges that you see in some parts of the country where the population is aging rapidly. That's a source of added cost. And there are different ways you could actually, that could be just an add-on to the CHT, but to address demographic and socioeconomic factors beyond what the CHT does already on a per capita basis. So I think that's something we could explore. Now, beyond that, I think that we have to also imagine what could exist beyond the CHT. You know, the CHT was only created in 2003. We talk about it like if it has always been the case. The health funding in Canada has changed a lot since the 1970s. There was a huge change in 1977 and other changes later, 1995 and so forth. And I think we have to also think about whether moving forward the CHT is the only tool available, or whether we can think about earlier tax points were alluded. There was also a possibility of having revenue sharing in terms of having a tax a federal tax that will be redistributed directly to the provinces, like it's done with the GST in Australia. So these are things that we explore in our paper. And I very much hope that you could look at it and then provide feedback to us about it, because I think that the ideas are there and we need people to talk about this, and not just to get stuck into the CHT and how much it should increase every year and so forth, because there's much more to healthcare funding than just that.
Well, and I've only got a few seconds left, but the last question I'm going to ask, just to follow up on what you were talking about in terms of demographic information. We have been noting for well over 20, 30 years that we're going to have a huge increase in the aging population, unlike anything that Canada has ever seen. So I'm just wondering, when we look at how the CHT transfers work in terms of modernization, how would we start to plan ahead so that we're not sort of reacting as we are now in a crisis point?
I think we can modify as we propose with Trevor Toom in our paper. We can actually revise the CHT so that it will actually compensate the provinces for the added cost of demographic aging. And I think the federal government should bear these extra costs because it has, of course, a much greater fiscal capacity than the provinces.
Thank you, and thank you, MP Blaney. We are moving into our second round members. We have the Conservatives up first. MP Chambers for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I notice you're in the giving mood this season with your liberal use of the clock you have. I'll try to be on time as much as I can, but we all appreciate your generosity. Mr. Giroux, welcome back. Every time we turn around, it seems like we're discussing one of your reports, so this is, I think, a good thing. Just out of curiosity, we hear a lot about, say, the Congressional Budget Office in the U.S. How does your office compare in size to that office?
I think of memory it's about 10% in size.
So that office is about 10 times larger than yours?
I think so.
Okay.
Significantly bigger.
Significantly bigger. Just, it's the level of work, the quantity of work, and the quality of work that comes out of your office is always very high. So we appreciate, this and all of your team for their hard work. For us, this is a new-ish, office. Hasn't been around for generations or even many decades, but I think it's really finding its place in our political discourse or helping parliamentarians. So thank you for your service, all of your team. I wanted to pick up on my colleague, Mr. Saint-Marie, the fiscal situation in the provinces. Do you see the improvement in the last little while as a sustainable improvement or more of a short-term improvement in the fiscal situation of provinces?
Well, I see that more as a short-term improvement because of the pressure that population aging will put on provincial finances mostly. And as I've explained a few times before in other fora, population aging will have differential impacts at the provincial and federal level. At the provincial level, the main driver of expenditures caused by population aging will be healthcare. And anybody who looks at the profile of health expenditure by age cohort will see that the moment somebody turns 65 or 70, annual average expenditures for persons in that age group rise dramatically, and they skyrocket when somebody reaches 85 or 90, which is not unusual. Very high in the first year of life of anybody, and very high in the last years of life. Whereas at the federal level, population aging will put pressure on old age security and the guaranteed income supplement, but these costs are indexed to CPI, so to inflation. So the growth is constrained to a larger extent, much more so than healthcare expenditures. The other big chunks of expenses at the federal level, transfers to provinces and territories, they're constrained by GDP growth by and large. So structurally, expenditures at the federal level are constrained. Expenditures at the provincial level are like skyrocketing because of healthcare costs. So that's how one can explain the differences in sustainability at the federal and provincial level.
That's very helpful. I think most fiscal federalism is often really just a larger conversation about healthcare costs. And provinces over many governments, over many decades, citing the facts of increasing healthcare costs, aging population, and for a number of years, it's hard to beat the law of numbers, right? If transfers are going up, say, only by 3%, but healthcare costs are going up by anything more than that, you eventually get to a more of a burden on provinces where this is where the expenditures are. So is it time, perhaps, for Parliament to consider a real tough discussion on healthcare, how you can preserve the universality of the system we have, but focus more on outcomes. How can we deliver the right outcomes for people, help contain costs? I note, I'd point out that the Deputy Prime Minister recently said herself, we should be measuring outcomes. That's not necessarily a bad thing. And if some provinces find different ways to deliver that care while preserving the universality, is that not something we should be having a kind of a more honest conversation about as parliamentarians?
I think when we know we're heading to a wall, fiscally speaking, or difficult decisions, the sooner we collectively as a nation or you as legislators have these discussions and come to a resolution, the easier it is to make these changes. We've seen that in the 1990s with the CPP and the QPP, where it was deemed necessary to increase the rates to face the upcoming wave of retirements. Had governments waited longer, it would have been a different story. We know we'll be faced with healthcare costs that will go on increasing. So the choice is to do something now or to do something later, but it won't be cheaper if we wait.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, MP Chambers. And now moving to the Liberals, MP Baker, for 5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur Giroux, c'est...
Thank you very much, Chair. It's very nice to see you again, Mr. Giroux, before the committee. We were last week, I think, before the committee. And I was replacing somebody at OGO, and there again, I met you there. I've seen you almost every day now. One never knows if Mr. Chambers is encouraging the expansion of your office, perhaps, so that we can get to see you every week. However, we've heard from the provinces saying that the share that the federal government has is only 22% for healthcare share. Now, of course, this doesn't take into consideration other aspects that were not covered before, like mental health issues or home care. Your analysis in healthcare services also comes up with 22%, does it not? Thank you very much for your question. Yes, I understand that we do meet quite often, and I like to accept invitations when I receive them, that's all. But to answer to your question, our analysis indicates rather 32% of the healthcare costs are covered by federal contribution. This includes that which is the Canada Health Act, of course, those services, hospital, doctors, establishments for the seniors, which is covered by the Canadian Health Act. But it does not include some other things that provinces may have chosen to provide. And that might distort the data somewhat or change the denominator so that the ratio might be a little bit lower. So we do arrive in our analysis at 32%. Taking a look at what is admissible by the Canada Health Act. Have you analyzed, evaluated the value for money, the rate of return on our investment? I was a management consultant and in the private sector and other organizations, well-run organizations. They spent enormous amounts of money, but they always checked against the analysis of ROI, return on investment. Have you conducted this type of analysis on these numbers, and would you have any comment on the results of your analysis? No, we don't analyze. We did not organize the whole sector of health. Others do, and they do also comparisons of life expectancy internationally against other countries, etc. But we don't have any performance measures for the result of the investments of various levels of government and health sector. Well, let's say I take the position that we want to improve our fiscal performance, optimize or maximize or optimize the results for Canadians as to public spending of all sorts. Would it be a good practice to conduct that type of analysis so that the government analyzes the performance of their investments, whether it's a federal transfer to province or other? Would it be a good practice? Not only the analysis, and then we would invest in areas where performance is high and gives best benefit. Well, I don't know if you can link the result, the investment to the result. It's a good idea in theory, but just measuring the results, very laudable, but very difficult. If you want to determine what are the best practices in order to adapt them to other uses, I don't see how that it would be a bad thing. It's obviously not a bad thing. And what do you measure in health? How do you measure the results, the outcomes? I would leave that to someone else. But of course, it's always a good idea to analyze and evaluate the results, the output.
You,
You weren't so liberal with
MP
me,
Baker, that's
Mr.
right.
Chair.
And I just, but I'll jump on board and say we always welcome you, Monsieur Giroux, and we thank you very much for the work that you do for Parliament and for parliamentarians. We're now moving to the block for 2.5 minutes. MP Samari, please.
Oui, merci, Monsieur.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. And I also join my colleagues in recognizing and acknowledging all the excellent work done by your office. We also recognize that the jurisdiction, health, is a provincial one. And it's the provinces discussing among themselves to discuss what are their best practices. The Bloc Québécois is a little reticent to tie further contributions to certain conditions of performance. Infrastructure, for example, in health, is a long, multi-year project usually. And generally, they're giving more credence than smaller projects from the municipalities. So we agree with the provinces that we don't want to link performance to conditions imposed by Ottawa. In the calculation that you've made in your document, main support from the federal September 2020, keeping with other questions today, what do you think of the services that are offered by the provinces but not covered by the feds? Well, I don't have an answer. I have a list of what is included in the Canada Health Act, but I don't have a list of those things that are not included, but in fact implemented somewhere in the country. Pharmaceuticals, for example, are not included directly. Optometrists' services are not included. Doctors are covered, but the specialized are not. Well, the provinces are absolutely collectively on the same foot when they say they want to see increases in the health transfer in order to make up for the increased costs. Additional money would be required. What would be the impact on the viability of the fiscal system federally? Well, we haven't done that kind of analysis, but I think if we receive a specific request from provincial governments, we could arrive at an impact report, as we did in July, for the viability, the fiscal liability or viability of both provinces and the federal government. Thank you very much, Mr. Saint-Marie.
Well, thank you, Chair. One of the main arguments, of course, for equalization in Canada is the principle of horizontal equality, which is to say, regardless of where you live in Canada, there should be a basic or standard quality of life, or I like to call it a bar of dignity. So I'm coming back to you, Mr. Beland. In your essay on the economics of equalization, which is part of the fiscal federalism and equalization policy in Canada, you explain that principle, as well as some of the traps that we can fall into. I'm wondering if you'd be able to walk the committee through some of what you think works and some of what you think doesn't work. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, so I think that equalization is something fundamental for our fiscal, not just our fiscal system, but for federalism, because I do think that because equalization doesn't have any strings attached, the provinces that receive equalization can do what they want with their money, with the money they receive. So it doesn't infringe on their autonomy, but at the same time provides provinces that have a lower fiscal capacity, so poorer provinces, to actually provide better services to the residents of their province without having to tax them in a way that is really disproportional to the services that they receive. And that is why this is the principle that's embedded in the 1982 Constitutional Act. And I read the section 36.2 in my opening remark. So what works and what doesn't? The first thing I think I would say is that I think that overall equalization does work in the sense that, you know, we talk a lot about healthcare, but take another topic like education, right? We don't have a Department of Education in this country, as opposed to many other federal countries like the United States. The federal government plays a very limited role in education, especially, you know, pre-secondary education. And despite this, and there is a Jennifer Wallner from University of Ottawa who published a book about this. Despite this, no federal norms and massive federal intervention in education policy, and yet we are doing very well in international tests, and inequalities across the country, if you compare the provinces in terms of education, are not that dramatic. So this is a success story, and I think, as Jennifer Wallner argues in her book, it's partly because of equalization. So equalization is, yes, there is this horizontal redistribution, horizontal fairness, but at the same time, it's done in a way that actually protects provincial autonomy, even the autonomy of poorer provinces. And I think that is something that, although we can always revise the formula, as I said earlier, and there are always things we can improve about equalization, the very logic of equalization is necessary if we want to combine some level of fairness and solidarity with decentralization, with a high level of decentralization, which is what we have in Canada.
Merci. Thank you, MP Blaney. And now to the Conservatives that we have MP Lawrence on video conference. Witnesses, you can see him for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Given your generosity, if you could stop me at 10 minutes, that would be great. Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Sutterson, I'm interested, or Professor Sutterson, I'm interested in discussing, I'm hoping your internet holds out. If not, I'll have to have another line of questioning, and that's fine. You mentioned that the government, federal government gave up tax points, but I mean, I'm not a management consultant. I'm just a simple guy from Orono. But I believe that the federal tax rates have changed considerably, which seems to poke a pretty big hole in your theory that these tax points equate to additional money to the provinces. Am I missing something there?
Onderstrom?
Yes. Yes.
We can hear you. Go ahead.
A tax point is a tax point. And one tax point that generates certain revenue. so that if you pass one tax point from the feds to the provinces then have more power to collect revenue.
But since then, the feds have increased taxes. They've reduced taxes also over the last 30 years, I guess, or so. So it hasn't stayed constant. So I fail to see where that transfer has remained constant. And doesn't that undermine your point?
The tax points that were transferred have remained constant since 1977.
Okay, so
the number of tax points transferred
have
remained constant.
Okay. All right. So sorry, just to understand that. So when they say the tax point has transferred, my understanding was they lowered their taxes, so they allowed the province to increase their taxes. Have I misunderstood that?
Yes.
But the feds have since increased their taxes
for other purposes.
But thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Professor Soderstrom. I appreciate that. I'm glad the internet held up. I'll just make a quick comment there that doesn't hold water. Like it's said, the tax points have since gone up, so that money is no longer being transferred to the province. I mean, I think that's
yes. I'm sorry, you're wrong on that.
Apparent.
Money is there. The money's there.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Soderstrom. Mr. Beeland.
Appel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Point of order. When there's all this crosstalk, when everybody's talking all at once, the interpreters are having a bit of a challenge there.
Witnesses, members, yeah, we don't want any crosstalk. It is very difficult and very difficult on the interpreter, I can only imagine. So if you could continue, MP Lawrence, please.
Thank you very much, and my apologies, Mr. Chair, and my apologies to the interpreter. I know that they're doing an incredibly difficult job. Professor Wieland, the challenge I have with your theory of an arm's length, really arm's length is another word for unelected. And yes, democracy is messy, politics are messy, but it's like I am the voice of Northumberland, Peterborough South. And so when we remove elected officials, which granted politics, but politics isn't all bad. Politics is bringing the voices of Crammy, of other small towns to Ottawa. And excuse me if I'm a little bit skeptical of another bureaucratic body that at least contends to be an expert to tell the people of Alberta or tell the people of British Columbia how much money they should or should not receive. Can you understand my concern there? Is that legitimate at all?
Yes, but the thing is that civil servants, bureaucrats, are already playing a major role in tweaking fiscal transfers. They do a lot of work, and then of course, the executive and the House of Commons play a major role in that. But what I'm proposing is not that these people will make the decisions for elected officials. They will make recommendations that then elected officials, the parliament can decide to adopt or reject, right? So it's just about getting, I think, better advice and more detached advice than from civil servants who directly depend on elected officials. Elected officials say, so for example, civil servants working in the Department of Finance. So I think that having the advice and recommendations about equalization coming from an outside body and not coming, say, from the Department of Finance is probably actually, in terms of optics, but perhaps also in terms of the quality and the detached nature of the advice, I think it will actually be better. And other countries are doing this, not just Australia. So this is not just some kind of weird idea that I'm the only one talking about. This is quite a common practice around the world.
I wasn't saying it was weird for a second, Professor Wieland, but you can understand my concerns here. My next question is for Mr. Giroux. I'll jump in and. Oh, am I done? Sorry,
yeah,
Mr. Chair.
That's the time. We've gone over. We didn't get quite to the 10 minutes, but it got close. So we are now moving to MP MacDonald for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And it's an interesting conversation sitting here, listening to the different parties discuss about how the services are delivered from province to province. And I think, Mr. Morin's talking about his son, and even Mr. Chambers talking about, unconditional transfers. So I guess I'll go to you, Mr. Giroux, and just ask you your opinion on the unconditional transfers, and is there an opening or a positive message or something relative that you could describe in saying this would be more beneficial for you, evaluating where the money has gone and how it's being spent, or is it just something that we're tossing around to for consideration relative to a political agenda by whatever party's at the helm?
Well, my understanding is that equalization is unconditional. CHT is largely unconditional because money is fungible anyways. And the same goes for CST, the Canada Social Transfer. So the federal government is accountable to the electorate for the amount of money it spends and the amount of money it sends to provinces. Provinces are accountable to their electorate for how they deliver, how well or not so well they deliver services with the resources they have. So that's probably as much as I can say on that topic.
And just, the tendency for discussion around fiscal federalism to focus just solely on equalization, and we're hearing around the table about regional economies and the architectural federalism somebody talked about earlier. In your mind, how important is it for governments to expand the scope of the formula, or at least to investigate the formula relative to what you're hearing here today and what you've written about?
Well, my opinion on that is we should, you as legislators have voted legislation, and I think legislation should be based on principles and should be left alone unless there are major structural issues. The risk in reopening legislation every few years is that every time one jurisdiction is unhappy with the amounts it receives or with an outcome that was not anticipated, we reopen legislation and we amend a very complex formula which has implications in the billions of dollars. So I think we should have a legislation for equalization and other transfers that's based on a series of broad principles that's developed, approved, debated, approved in Parliament, and we should leave it alone unless there are major issues that are found to be of concern by parliamentarians.
So I guess back to my initial comment on regional economies, for example, or industries and sectors. It's different right across this vast country of ours, obviously. And we talked a little bit about demographics. So if I'm hearing you correct, and that's going to change year to year. So and each province will be different, and so on and so forth. And I remember on Prince Edward Island the growth we've had from many individuals moving from Ontario. Which, when you look at that, it's great to see the numbers coming, but let's be honest, the consumption tax and our health organizations, or health PEI in our case, are being extremely stressed, and it's a lot of that demographic, the older demographic, moving to Prince Edward Island. So I guess what I'm saying is, how do you change that complicated formula, because it is, to include those regional economies or demographics or whatever? Is it possible?
Well, it would be possible to also look at the needs. You could add an element of demographics, not just looking at the overall population numbers, but the composition of that population, to take into account, for example, the fact that some provinces have more older folks than others. But then that would be detrimental, so to speak, to provinces that are younger. So that's what I mean. If you start playing with the formula, there's always something somebody is disadvantaged by any change you make. So that's why I'm saying once we have a formula, we let it work its magic.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, MP MacDonald, and that ends our second round. We are into our third round. We'll get through the third round, and then I think we'll have to break up the time equally at the end after the third round. So in this third round, the Conservatives are up first, and I've got MP Helen for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your generosity today, and thank you to all the witnesses. My questions are for Mr. Giroux. energy plays a big part in the fiscal stability of Canada. Energy provides a lot to the revenue provinces contribute to in equalization. With provinces like mine in Alberta, we make a substantial amount from energy royalties. Canadian Energy Centre projects between 2000 and 2019, the energy sector provided provinces with an average of $35 billion in royalties. What do you think the impact would be overall to equalization if energy wasn't there to provide so much government revenue?
Well, the equalization formula includes provisions for non-renewable resources. But if there was not the energy sector in Alberta, it's clear that the economy in that province would not be as flourishing as it has been for the last couple of decades, and it would be clearly detrimental to both levels of government, the federal as well as obviously the provincial government.
Thank you. We've seen many energy projects cancelled or frozen by federal bureaucratic red tape. What has the impact been on equalization when energy projects like the 15 LNG projects since 2015 that have not been built yet, or pipelines like Energy East that got cancelled, and mines like the Tech Frontier, the project in Fort Mac, them being cancelled? What's your opinion on how big of an effect that would have?
It's difficult to determine exactly, to quantify that impact. But assuming that these projects would have increased GDP, they would have benefited equalization by leading to a slightly faster GDP growth, to which the size of the equalization formula is linked. That being said, there would have been other consideration for sure in having these projects go ahead, but from an economic and federal-provincial transfer dynamic, I think it's safe to say these would have been the impact.
Thank you. And in your opinion, the impacts in a decline in energy projects, what kind of impact do you think that would have on fiscal federalism in Canada?
Well, that's a much bigger question than just transfers themselves, because then you get into the dynamics of reducing transfers, increasing transfers, equalization, and so on, as well as some pure policy questions regarding provinces blocking developments of others and so on, which is not for me to comment on.
Fair enough. Jay Goldberg from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation told this committee the equalization formula changes, such as reducing resources revenues to 50%, has punished resource-heavy provinces such as Alberta, Saskatchewan, or Newfoundland and Labrador, and has disincentivized other provinces from developing resources. If there isn't new resource development in the so-called have-not provinces, how does this affect the sustainability of equalization and the current fiscal federalism model?
Well, that's a delicate question, because I know it was the subject of many deliberations of the expert panel on equalization in 2005-06, as Professor Belin alluded to. So it's true that the moment you include some types of revenues in the formula to determine the entitlement of equalization to some provinces, it provides a disincentive to see that tax base grow, because otherwise, if they grow or allow that tax base to grow, it diminishes their entitlements for equalization. But I think that there are broader incentives at play that provinces should take into account when deciding to develop or not certain sectors than just revenues that they could forego from the federal government, such as jobs for their citizens. But it's true that including some elements in the formula for equalization can have perverse incentives.
You, MP Halvin. And now moving to the Liberals, MP Baker for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mr. Soderstrom, I wanted to start with you, if I may, briefly. You've spoken quite a bit about tax points, and I'm wondering if you have data that you could share with this committee, not today, but maybe in writing, in terms of back in 1977, how much did we lower personal income tax and corporate tax, and also how much the provinces raised theirs, and what is the dollar value of that, both then, but in today's, on an annual basis, but also in today's dollars, just so we can evaluate the extent to which those tax points have resulted in a transfer of funding capacity from the federal government to the provinces. Could you share that with us in writing?
Muted. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
You raise a good question, and as I've been thinking about this issue over the cost-sharing issue for the last couple of years, I realized that one of the mistakes that I made and my colleagues in the health economics made is that we didn't look at the response in taxes at the federal and provincial level after 1977. So you couldn't go into the literature and find an answer to your question. There's a good PhD thesis there, though, for somebody to go back and look at what actually did happen to federal and provincial tax to see if the feds actually reduced all our points they promised and if the provinces did the opposite.
Let me just jump in there. I guess what I'm wondering is if you can. I mean, I've pursued a couple of degrees in university, and I won't pursue a third in terms of PhD theses or anything like that. But what I really would be interested in is if you can share with the committee in writing what the amount was in dollar value of the change in taxes that the federal government gave up to the provinces in terms of those tax points. Like, I'm just looking for a quantification of the tax points that you spoke about. If you could send that in the committee, that'd be great. If Mr. Chair, I'd like to move on to another question, if I may. Mr. Giroux, I'd like to come back to you, if I may. Chair, how much time do I have?
You have 2.5 minutes.
2.5 minutes. Okay. So, Mr. Giroux, first of all, in our earlier exchange, we were talking about the value of measuring value for dollars, outcomes that we obtain for Canadians for the federal dollars invested. And you talked about the fact that analyzing that or measuring that would be useful. So let's say we did measure that. And I know that there's challenges in measuring certain things, but assuming we do our best and we get over that hurdle, what's the value of that for government? What could we potentially do with that information?
Well, I'm not sure there would be that much value for the federal government itself. There could be, depending on the policy directions that the government chose to take, but I think the value would be mostly for citizens. They would have a better idea as to how because ultimately it's their tax dollars, whether they're provided by the feds or the provinces, how their tax dollars are used and how efficient their use is. And I think there would be some benefits for provinces and territories too, in the sense that if they see that some jurisdictions can perform surgeries, for example, in a more efficient manner, they could learn from each other, taking into consideration the differences in backgrounds and in environments and clienteles. So I think that's the value that there could be, and we might find that there are useful areas to spend in that we haven't thought about or to invest in that case. But to go back to our earlier exchange, I'm not implying that it is necessarily the federal government's job to collect that information. And to go back to Monsieur Sainte-Marie's point, I'm not implying that necessarily the federal government has to do that job. But there are federal institutions that collect data, such as the Canadian Institute for Health Information, known as CIHI, and they provide valuable info to provinces and territories and Canadians.
You earlier spoke about the fact that, we are accountable to citizens, both as elected officials, at the federal level and the provincial level. So as someone who's elected, who's accountable to the citizens of the community of Etobicoke Centre, if we discovered that certain investment, certain federal spending was resulting in better outcomes than other spending, would it not be incumbent on us as legislators accountable to people who want us to get maximum value for the dollars to make adjustments in how we spend, or to urge those who are ultimately executing that spending that they deliver higher outcomes? Would that not be appropriate?
I think Canadians would expect you to intervene in that manner and make these recommendations or have these discussions.
And over to the bloc and MP Somebody.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Dans le même ordre d'idée, je crois que tous les élus
Thank you. I think all the elected officials provincially should perhaps take a look at the efficiency with which money is being spent, and perhaps they can contribute anything they learn with the federal government. But we mustn't forget that there are constitutional issues here of jurisdiction. Each level of government has to commit to doing the best that they can in fulfilling their individual roles, without being, and also being concerned with how it's done at the other level of government. Anyway, another question: is it possible to make a linkage between your study federally and the payments in health, for example, and the various reports on long-term viability fiscally? Some negotiations were conducted, of course, recently, and progressively there will be a reduction, a gradual reduction in the amounts invested in health, for example. On page 2 of your graph, we see that it seems already to top out in 2016-17, but the data stops in 2018. And your report was published in 2020, I believe. Have there been new policies, new negotiations that could be undertaken in order to adjust this for future years? The percentage will not increase significantly. It may slowly decline as a greater percentage of the population ages, and as I say, the expenses really increase for 75 years and over, and the ratio should perhaps diminish over time insofar as the health expenditures of the provinces are under constant pressure. So it depends on the rate of growth of the general economy. Well, you mentioned a little earlier the health costs for seniors is much more significant than somebody who is in his full force of age. Do you have any ratios, any proportions here that you could perhaps provide, whereby an elderly person would use up to maybe 4 times the expenses or services? Well, I think CIHI might provide important information there, and I think that they are public, in fact, but we can probably obtain them and send you something to answer your question.
For 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you so much, Chair. Mr. Beland, the essay on economics alludes to the cost of living and how that can encourage or dissuade migration. I think all Canadians from coast to coast to coast are feeling extremely strapped for cash right now. But I'm wondering if you are concerned about the impacts of inflation. Are there areas of the country that you feel may be more at risk for feeling the impacts of inflation disproportionately? And if so, what's the risk for provinces in terms of fiscally induced migration?
Yes, this is really a bit outside my area, really, but I could say that inflation is hurting low-income people more than higher-income people. And obviously that is true all across the country. And so I think we need to address that, but I do think that fiscal federalism is probably not the best tool that we have. That transfers to individuals and families is probably the way to address this. And here the federal government has, I think, an important role to play. But of course, through fiscal federalism, it supports the provinces, which can also develop their own programs to support individuals and families, especially low-income individuals and families who are coping with inflation. So I think there is a direct way to do it through measures enacted by the federal government, and also, of course, helping if you help the provinces from a fiscal standpoint, they can adopt the measures that they see fit. But I do think that low-income people are especially vulnerable to inflation, and this is something we should keep in mind, not just when we talk about fiscal federalism, but when we talk about social programs at large.
Well, thank you for that. And I know that a lot of provinces have challenges around this issue, around migration, and families are often split up. I know in some parts of my riding, we see a lot of people going to different provinces to work. So just to come back, I understand it's not your area of expertise, but you talked about low-income people experiencing that, but do you see that as a factor for low-income provinces as well? And how does federal fiscalism help with supporting stabilization for communities, or is that even something that we can look at?
Well, yes. I mean, poor provinces are their population is on average more vulnerable to wealthier provinces in a way when we talk about the negative effects of inflation, in a sense. You could say that. Regarding migration, I think you raise a very important issue. I think equalization actually, implicitly at least, is partly about helping people to stay where they live by providing them with relatively good public services for a tax burden that's not excessive. So by helping poor provinces to offer decent services, good services to their inhabitants, it makes it, we could say probably, easier for them to actually keep their people, because people can leave their province for different reasons, because of job opportunities elsewhere and so forth, or lack of job opportunities at home. But we don't want people to leave their province because the social and health services are so bad that they need to move to another part of the country to access decent services. And I think equalization is part of the tools that we have to prevent that.
Thank you, MP Blaney. We'll now move to the Conservatives. MP Chambers for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm realizing with all this discussion about provincial finances, maybe Mr. McDonald should be a witness to give us his experience in the province of PEI with his in that provincial legislature and as a minister. Mr. Bélan, I just wanted to pick up on a conversation you had with my colleague, Mr. Lawrence. This commission that you're considering, in terms of a governance model, do you, and forgive me for my ignorance, but have you discussed how you might set it up? Is the CPP a governance model, the way that it's chosen, would be an option? Is that what you think might be viable?
This is a very good question. Thank you very much. Yes, the CCP Investment Board is actually something we discussed in a paper that we wrote for the now extinct Mohat Institute, in a paper that I can actually send to the clerk, and he can, or someone else at the committee who can distribute it. But we wrote this paper quite a few years ago, and it's still available online. I can send it to the committee, and we discuss the CCP Investment Board as a potential template to create an equalization, a permanent equalization or fiscal federalism commission in Canada. So your question goes in the right direction, in the sense that this is something that we have considered, and I think this is something that we should still consider moving forward.
Thank you. If you could share that, that would be helpful. And I did just want to point out, you used the example of education as an area with which the federal government has very low involvement, and yet you also pointed out that as a country, our test scores and education's outcomes, comparably speaking to our peers, are quite high. I might, correlation isn't causation, but I might, at least posit that we should explore. Maybe it's the reason why we have good outcomes and scores is because the federal government isn't as involved in education. But I'll leave that there for now. Mr. Giroux, we talk a little bit about inflation tax points and transfers. I mean, there really is just one taxpayer. With the governments, we have these tax sharing arrangements now with provincial governments. Is there really like a tax point transfer discussion that has to happen, or can it be just allocated based on revenues generated from that province with which there is a tax sharing agreement? Like, do you have to really get into this tax point transfer? It seems quite complicated. Like, could you not just say, look, there's one taxpayer, they pay this much in tax, it's all going into the same pot? Like, is that a conversation that ought to happen, or is the system we have set up working okay?
That's all in the eyes of the beholder. So the last time there was a significant tax point transfer, as Mr. Soderstrom pointed out, was 1977. So it was a long time ago, and I think personally that this issue is behind us for a reason, because tax points don't have the same value in different jurisdictions. It's much more lucrative to transfer tax points in Alberta than to get the same tax point in New Brunswick or Quebec, for example. So that's why probably there was a one time, or that the last time was 1977, because they don't have the same value. So personally, I think that issue is behind us, and we should consider it done, and that's an idea that is probably done its time.
Okay, thank you. And one final question. We just heard a little bit of a discussion about inflation, and we did have the Auditor General's report yesterday, but there was what appears to be 15% of COVID pandemic benefits have now kind of been questioned, right, in terms of eligibility criteria. So not into the politics of that, but from an inflationary perspective, would it be your opinion that, money that was given out as part of this would have had an impact on the inflationary pressures we've seen?
It's clear, especially with the numbers that the Auditor General was mentioning in her report yesterday. It's clear that when you're talking about dozens of billions of dollars, it adds to the inflationary pressures. Even though it's decimal points, it still is an addition to inflation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MP Chambers, and right on time. We are now moving to the Liberals, and I have MP MacDonald for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I want to continue on a little bit on that conversation that you just had with Mr. Chambers relevant to target spending. So was it appropriate for the government to very specifically target spend, and what type of inflation would that have on programs such as CERB when individuals basically lost their jobs and so on and so forth?
Well, it would be hard for me to say it was not appropriate to have these programs when the House, I think, voted unanimously for that. So I'd be going against 338 MPs and 100 senators, and I'm not that courageous. Not yet. Or not close enough to retirement. So I would say it was probably appropriate. And the impact of not having provided these programs would have been, I think, catastrophic. We would not have talked about inflation. We would have talked about depression, probably mass. I'm looking for the word. Faillite. Anyways, bankruptcies. Merci beaucoup. Mass bankruptcies and significant, like human loss, not human losses, but human costs. Sorry.
So, I guess something that I'm interested in a little bit is, so the federal government done much of the heavy lifting through the past 2.5 years on COVID. And I guess, and we're seeing many surpluses in budgets right across the country. So their credit in many of these provinces will allow them to borrow more next year and maybe more the following year. I'm just wondering how do you measure that going forward? How do you kind of foresee that in your forecast on what will transpire as far as transfers and things like that? Because if they spend, I guess, based on this year's income because of the federal contributions through the pandemic, so I guess if the bond raters are basically looking at them and allow them to maintain their level of achievements, and then they go out and spend more the next year or the year after, we're going to see another decline, and we'll be sitting back at this table again talking about transfer payments not being enough, possibly.
I'm not exactly sure I understand your question, but I think what you're referring to is the capacity of provinces to borrow at reasonable rates because of the fact that their fiscal situation is sounder than it would have been. So the bond rates applied to provinces is usually that of the federal government plus a premium that varies across jurisdiction depending on the perceived risk of each jurisdiction. So, but it's true that the fact that they did not bear the brunt of the pandemic response or the cost of the pandemic, it leaves them in a better fiscal position. And without that, their debt levels would have been higher, and the premium that they have to pay compared to the federal bonds would probably be slightly higher than it is. But the counterfactual we'll never know for sure because there's no way to run that experiment,
Okay.
thankfully.
How much do I still have time?
You still have a minute and a half, yes.
Okay. So the funding to the provinces, such as the $4 billion top-up to health transfers, $2 billion to clear surgical backlogs, to improve conditions in long-term care, and that doesn't include the extensive support for the testing and contact tracing. Do we have any accounting or data that shows if the $4 billion plus the $2 billion top-ups payment to reduce surgery backlogs, long-term care funding was fully utilized for those purposes? Do we have any accountability of that or tracking of it, your office?
As those monies are transferred to provinces, they were largely, there was no accountability. The provinces were able to spend as they saw fit to meet their needs for services of their residents.
So again, we're back to the accountability thing, and I think everybody, is saying now that maybe there should be some sort of measurement on how provinces spend their money relative to healthcare and some of the social programs that they have. Measuring that obviously will be very complicated. So I guess in short, saying the formula that's used for the equalization payment stays as is, but over and above that, there's additional, and maybe it's some of the stuff that Mr. Beeland is talking about, if there's an additional way to measure, like we do with every other program that we transfer from the federal government to the provincial government. There's programs, we're transferring money all the time. Is that something that would be worthwhile to look into, to have it over and above the present equalization? So if we increase the healthcare budget by 10% or 15%, which I think we did say that we would by 10%, is there some other mechanism besides testing the equalization, which obviously from your point of view, we shouldn't fool around with it too much?
Well, if there's a specific purpose that the government has in mind, for example, improved health outcomes, it certainly is possible for the federal government to introduce such transfers. And as I said before, Parliament can deem Mondays to be Fridays, so it can certainly do many more things than that. So, but that's an issue for politicians and legislators to debate.
Thank you, and thank you, MP MacDonald. Looking at the time, members, as we normally do on this committee, as practice, is that when we don't have enough time for a full round, we do split the time equally. I'm looking at about 16 minutes, so it'll be about 4 minutes per party. We're starting with the Conservatives. I have MP Morantz, please.
Thank you. Mr. Giroux, earlier in our discussion, you had mentioned, I believe I'm right in this, that the transfers to provinces, whether they be equalization, health, or social, are essentially without strings attached, that the province gets this money and they can allocate it as they wish. Recently, there's been some back and forth in the media over the health transfer, and I noted recently the health minister, Mr. Duclos, in an article he was quoted as saying that he committed to additional healthcare dollars for the provinces and territories. And he says, but this new money will come with conditions. He said, which includes expanding the use of, which will include, so it's not an exclusive list, expanding the use of common key health indicators and building a world-class health data system for the country. So that statement, it seems inconsistent with your understanding of how this works. I'm wondering if you could comment on that. Does the federal government have the right to impose conditions on the provinces as to how they use these monies?
Well, my understanding is that CHT, CST, and equalization are unconditional transfers, but given the needs of provinces, it's fair to assume that all the money transferred to provinces for CHT goes to provinces. Whether the government has the capacity to do conditional transfers, again, I'm not a constitutional expert, and I think there is as much politics as there is constitutional issues in that, and that's why I'm happy to say I cannot comment much more than that.
Mr. Giroux, after talking to you over the last few years, I'm convinced you are an expert in everything. Anyway, Professor Beeland, I just had a question for you. It's just, I think you had written something about, you had posited this idea of a federal provincial taxation regime to fund health care in replacement of the Canada Health Transfer. I think I have that right, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. What I wanted clarification from you in your thinking was, is this tax regime, would there be a corresponding tax reduction correlated to the amount of the Canada Health Transfer, or is this a new tax on Canadians?
No, that's so. What we can do is use an existing tax, right? So, for example, part of the GST or business income tax, and then allocate it to the provinces. But the thing, of course, that's important here, and that's why I think the idea is innovative that we put forward with Trevor Tombe, and I think the URL of our paper is embedded in the text that I sent to the clerk. So I think it's available to you and it's online already. The idea here is that the provinces will actually have to be consulted over any change to the tax rate. So if it will become a shared tax, so that the federal government could not suddenly lower that tax if it's, of course, to go to the provinces. So here, again, we actually borrow on the governance mechanism of the Canada Pension Plan, where you need 2/3 of the provinces representing 2/3 of the population to actually support a change for the change to occur. So and I think that's a way to protect the provinces, because if it's really a tax sharing system and the tax is being shared, the provinces should have a word to say in terms of increasing or decreasing the tax rate. So this is the idea that we put forward in our paper for the University of Calgary, the policy school. And there is another version of the paper. As soon as it's published in an academic journal, I will circulate it to this wonderful committee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, MP Morantz. And now to the Liberals, and I have MP Virani, and welcome to our committee.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. I've been listening along, and this is not my usual committee, but I'm going to ask you two questions. So one, Mr. Giroux, you just opined a little bit about sort of attaching conditions to federal transfers. We know so I am a lawyer, but we know from constitutional jurisprudence that there's shared jurisdiction in the area of health, right? So that's a case called R.J.R. McDonald. It was established quite clearly by the Supreme Court. We also know, obviously, there's federal legislation. There's the Canada Health Act. That's been mentioned many times. It's certainly within the purview of the federal government to ensure that the principles that are enshrined in the Canada Health Act are maintained by the provinces. Right? So we'd agree with that. In terms of I thought it was quite illuminating when you were outlining some of what has been represented in the public domain versus what your number crunching is showing. And I take great stock in terms of the fact that you are, as you said, accountable to all 338 of us and all of the senators, et cetera. So that's important. But you said it's, as opposed to the 22% number we've heard bandied about, it's actually more like 32 to 33%, I think you said about 45 minutes ago. there's I'll say to you that in the wake of some of the questions put to you by my colleague Mr. McDonald is that considering that the lion's share of the COVID supports that were put in place, the number that we frequently use as government members is that $8 out of every 10 was federal dollars to support Canadians during COVID, and those are important. And many of those supports were in place to address the concerns that you said. Avoiding the calamity of depression, massive poverty, I would add to that list, etc. That being said, when we enter into this discussion about transfers, particularly on health, we're also seeing where the largesse of the federal government has resulted in deficits and debts on the federal side, but we're looking at provinces that are sitting on surpluses, including the province of my home province, which is Ontario. Do you make similar observations, and do you have any suggestions about how equalization payments could be structured to address that sort of inequity between surpluses on one level of government versus deficits on another?
Well, we're talking about, I think, potentially two different things. There's structural and cyclical deficits and surpluses. So on the one hand, we have the federal government that is in deficit because of, I think, two things. Cyclical, like we suffered what was a short and profound recession, and we're recovering from that. But the government also embarked on a series of spending decisions, which is well within its policy purview, whereas provinces have recovered more quickly because they have not needed to go as deep in debt as the federal government due to COVID-19. So both elements are there. But looking at the longer term, when we do the fiscal sustainability report, we assume everything is put on autopilot, and we see that the federal situation is likely to be better than the provincial situation taken as a whole for the structural elements that I talked about earlier.
And you also mentioned at one point some of the benefits that are in the context of a slightly different discussion about inflation. You talked about some of the certain benefits being indexed to inflation. And my understanding of the various benefits that are tied to the cost of living, I think I forget the index you called CAI or CPI. But they include the Canada Child Benefit, the GST credit, the CPP, OAS, and the GIS, and even in fact the federal minimum wage, which was increased to $15 an hour, is also tied to that index. Are those is that a step in the right direction in terms of addressing the pressures that relate to the cost of living that Canadians are experiencing around the country right now?
Well, the fact that these benefits are indexed with a certain lag to take into account data gathering is intended to fully protect recipients from the impact of inflation. And I think it does a relatively good job of that because of their nature. It's fully indexed, which is not what every worker gets when they retire. Some pension plans are fully indexed, others are not. But the Canada Pension Plan, Quebec Pension Plan, Old Age Security, Guaranteed Income Supplement, they're fully indexed, so they are designed by their very nature to protect the purchasing power of seniors who receive these benefits.
Thank you, MP Varani, and that's the time. And then we're off to the block, and MP Samadi, please, for 4 minutes.
Oui, merci.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'd like to get some feedback, some response on this last exchange. We often hear from the government that the federal government put in, like you say, the heavy lifting and put in these benefits to assist the population. And we, of course, were taking a look at your reports on fiscal viability, and when we see these measures, the federal government's liabilities increased somewhat in the long term. Now, new expenses related to the pandemic, including upset vaccines and everything else, the number that was touted about was $8 out of 10 coming from the federal. So do you think that the provincial governments might be spending $7 or more out of the 10, that would be rebalancing. What's the margin maneuver for the federal government? Now, common thinking has it that the provincial governments are making cuts, whereas the federal government sustained us during the pandemic. So it all boils down to fiscal sustainability. The federal government intervened to assist the population get through this very difficult period of the pandemic, but it really doesn't change the marker very much because of, as you said, cyclic as opposed to structural. And with all this analysis and various perspectives, I'd like to ask you the following question, Mr. Giroux. These reports on fiscal viability, you examined fiscal federalism, of course. Are there any major differences in fiscal Well, this study allowed us to provide food for discussion, if you will. I don't want to raise old debates, but when I published the first report on fiscal viability, when I came to my position, I was quite surprised by the lack of debate that this generated, in fact, on that imbalance. That I didn't want to use that word, but the resources, of course, it offers some flexibility for the federal government, but they're going to be lacking resource at the provincial level for some time. So you should be, in fact, debating the transfer between these various levels of government. But this discussion did not occur. We hit the wall with the pandemic, and there was really no time to make that discussion given the seriousness of the crisis. Well, I think now times are quiet, calmer, and we'll be able to debate it. So I would like to thank I want to thank our witnesses here present and also those who were online. Thank you.
And now we're moving to the NDP. It'll be our final questioner. MP Blaney, please.
Well, thank you, Chair. And I'm going to come back to Mr. Beeland. I'm finding our conversation really interesting. I want to circle back to the first question that I asked. In the answer that you gave me, you mentioned the idea of a climate transfer and the fact that it really hasn't come up as a domestic discussion, and outlined some of the avenues you think would be best to facilitate that conversation. So in response to other questions, you have also mentioned some ways other jurisdictions do fiscal federalism well, Australia and the GST, for example. So I'm just wondering, with that in mind, if you know of any other countries that are exploring the idea of climate transfer, or if there's an example of somewhere else that's got a climate or environmental lens to their approach to fiscal federalism and equalization.
I think this is something that's being discussed, but I'm not aware of a major program in another country that will be the equivalent of what you have in mind. But I think it's worth exploring that and looking at what is debated in other countries. But I don't think that there's nothing that I can think of right now that would say, oh, that will be the template that Canada could use. There's nothing based on what I know that I could say is the model to follow or not.
Fair enough. I hope you keep your eye out on that. But when you did respond to me, you did talk about the expert panel and how that might be one of the facilities and places that discussion could happen. So just as my last question, I'm just wondering, you've talked a bit about what that might look like, but if you could just give us a more fulsome idea of what that would look like, how that would be appointed, who would be invited, and what their role would be in the context of these decisions. Thank you.
Yes, so there is a template, and you can actually find that on the website of the Government of Canada. If you look at the template, is the expert panel on equalization and territorial formula financing, and there is the report that they published in May 2006, and it was appointed by Paul Martin, and the chair was Al O'Brien from the University of Alberta. And you can see they actually explain, at the beginning of the report how they were appointed and the work they did. And I think that this could be a template for a future expert panel, because this expert panel, in terms of the depth of the report and the quality of the report, is, I think, really a template that we can certainly reuse to address new fiscal challenges and issues, including some of the ones that you actually mentioned today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, MP Blaney. And just on behalf of the entire Finance Committee, we want to thank our excellent witnesses for appearing for their testimony on this study. Thank Professor Beland, Professor Soderstrom, and of course, I'll amplify what many of the members said here. You're always welcome, and we like having you here. Parliamentary Budget Officer Giroux. Thank you very much. And yes, I heard the accolades that you got from MP Morantz about you're the master of everything and know everything. So we'll often, I'm sure, have you here before our committee. Thank you very much, everybody. And members, shall we adjourn? Okay, we're adjourned.